The Blackhorn Mountains rose like jagged teeth against the Wyoming sky, their peaks lost in perpetual mist. It was 1872, and this forsaken corner of the territory remained untamed, a place where civilization's reach grew weak and men's hearts grew hard. The wind carried the scent of pine and something darker, the promise of early snow that would seal the passes until spring. At the base of these mountains, where the grassland met the first slopes of granite and scree, sat Luther Clay's ranch. It sprawled across 1,000 acres of harsh beauty, its buildings huddled against the elements like creatures seeking shelter. The main house stood proud with its timber walls and glass windows, a testament to Clay's prosperity in this unforgiving land. But prosperity here was built on suffering. In the shadow of the barn, a figure moved with practiced silence, hauling water from the well. She had no name that mattered to anyone. Clay called her Girl when he bothered to address her at all. The ranch hands knew her only as Clay's property, bought and paid for 3 years ago from a trader passing through Cheyenne. Some whispered she'd cost him less than a good horse. Her hands were raw from the rope, her back bent from endless labor. Before dawn, she was in the kitchen, stoking fires and preparing meals. By day, she tended the horses, mended fences, hauled feed, and performed whatever task Clay's voice barked from across the yard. At night, she slept in the barn's corner on a bed of old straw, listening to the horses shift and snort in their stalls. The morning of her discovery began like any other. October frost silvered the grass as she emerged from the barn, bucket in hand, but Clay stood on the porch, his rifle across his arm, his weathered face set in its usual scowl. "Girl," he called, his voice cutting through the dawn quiet. "Get yourself ready. We're heading into the mountains." She knew better than to question. Within minutes, she'd gathered what he'd need: ammunition, dried meat, water skins. Clay was known for his hunting expeditions, though what he hunted wasn't always game. Sometimes he returned with pelts, sometimes with stories of claim jumpers run off his land, sometimes with nothing but a satisfied gleam in his cold eyes. They set out as the sun began its climb. Clay on his bay stallion, she following on foot. Her worn boots struggled for purchase on the rocky trail as they climbed higher, leaving the ranch behind. Clay never looked back to see if she kept pace. He knew she would. Where else could she go? The forest grew denser as they ascended. Ancient pines blocked out the sun, creating a twilight world of shadows and silence. Clay had been drinking from his flask since noon, and his mood had grown darker with each swig. He muttered about traps that had been disturbed, about someone poaching on his territory. "Probably them savages from the reservation," he spat, though the nearest reservation was 50 miles north. "Or worse, some drifter thinking he can take what's mine." They'd been walking for hours when she realized they'd entered a part of the forest she'd never seen. The trees here grew differently, twisted, ancient, their branches forming a canopy so thick that only scattered beams of light penetrated. The undergrowth was sparse, as if even plants feared to grow in this shadow. Clay dismounted near a cluster of rocks, studying tracks in the dirt. "Wait here," he commanded, disappearing into a thicket. She stood alone, the forest pressing in from all sides. That's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to any animal she knew. Low, almost human, carried on the wind from somewhere deeper in the woods. Curiosity, that dangerous luxury she rarely indulged, stirred within her. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them. She followed the sound, picking her way through the underbrush until the trees opened onto a narrow ravine. The walls were sheer granite, split by some ancient upheaval. At the bottom, partially hidden by fallen logs and debris, she saw the mouth of a cave. The sound came again, clearer now. It was human, a moan of pain or despair. She should have turned back. Clay would beat her senseless if he found her gone. But something pulled her forward, down the treacherous slope into the ravine. The cave mouth yawned before her, exhaling cold air that smelled of stone and something else, something alive. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. The cave extended back into the mountain, but near the entrance, where a shaft of light penetrated, She saw him. A man sat chained to the rock wall, his wrists and ankles bound by iron shackles that had worn grooves in the stone. His hair hung in matted strands to his shoulders, his beard wild and unkempt. Clothes that might once have been leather and homespun hung in tatters from his frame. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart, blue as winter sky, burning with a mixture of madness and desperation. He jerked when he saw her, pressing back against the wall as if trying to disappear into the stone itself. His lips moved, but no words came out, only a hoarse rasp. How long since he'd spoken? How long since he'd seen another soul? She took a step forward, and he flinched violently, the chains rattling. His mouth opened in a soundless scream, and she saw the terror there, not of her, but of hope itself. He thought she was a dream, a cruel vision sent to torment him. "Please," she whispered, the first word she'd spoken all day. "I'm real." But he shook his head violently, squeezing his eyes shut, willing her to disappear. She could see the bones prominent beneath his skin, the way his body had consumed itself to survive. On the ground near him lay evidence of his sustenance, small bones, probably from rats or birds that ventured too close. A wooden bowl, long dry, suggested someone had once brought him water. She wanted to move closer, to speak again, but Clay's voice echoed down from above, calling with the particular tone that meant violence if she didn't respond immediately. The chained man's eyes flew open at the sound, and she saw recognition there, and pure hatred. She scrambled back up the ravine, her heart pounding. Clay stood at the top, his rifle pointed at her chest. "What the hell you doing down there, girl?" I heard something," she stammered. "Thought it might be game." He studied her for a long moment, then lowered the rifle. "Nothing down there but death," he said. "That's the Demon's Gorge. Even the Indians won't go near it. Stories say there's a monster lives in them caves. Man who weren't quite man, killed a whole family over in Laramie. They never could catch him proper, but they trapped him here 10 years back. Let the mountain be his prison." She nodded, keeping her eyes down, but her mind raced. 10 years. That man had been chained in that cave for 10 years. Clay grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You stay away from there. You hear? Bad enough I got to keep you fed without you getting yourself killed by some wild thing. Now move. We got traps to check." She followed him back through the forest, but the image of those blue eyes, wild with desperation and disbelief, burned in her mind. As they made their way home in the dying light, she thought about chains, the invisible ones that bound her to Clay, and the all-too-real ones that held the stranger in the cave. That night, lying in her straw bed, she couldn't sleep. The horses sensed her restlessness, stamping and whickering softly. She thought about the man in the cave, wondered who had fed him before, who had stopped coming. Was he truly a monster, as Clay claimed, or was that just another story men told to justify their cruelties? She'd seen monsters in her life. They wore clean clothes and counted their money and bought human beings like cattle. They smiled at Sunday service and went home to darkness. If there was a monster in that cave, she doubted it was the one in chains. The thought grew in her like a seed in dark soil. She had nothing, no name, no freedom, no hope of escape. But perhaps she could give something to someone who had even less. A cup of water, a piece of bread, a moment's proof that not all the world had forgotten him. It was foolish. It was dangerous. Clay would kill her if he found out. But as she finally drifted toward sleep, she found herself planning, tomorrow, she would find a way. Because in that cave, in those desperate blue eyes, she had seen something that reflected her own captivity back at her. And for the first time in 3 years, she had found someone whose chains were worse than her own. 3 days passed before she found her chance. Clay rode out to town for supplies, leaving her with a list of chores that would keep any other soul busy until dark. But she'd learned efficiency in her captivity, moving through tasks with the mechanical precision of someone who'd been beaten for slowness too many times. By noon, she'd finished the washing, fed the horses, and mended the fence where the wind had torn it loose. Her hands moved to the hidden bundle she'd prepared. Hard biscuits saved from her own meager portions. A water skin filled at dawn. A small knife she'd found in the barn and sharpened on a whetstone. The journey to Demon's Gorge took less time now that she knew the way. She moved like a shadow through the forest, every sense alert for sounds of pursuit. The October air bit through her thin dress, but fear and purpose kept her warm. At the ravine's edge, she paused. What if he was dead? What if Clay had lied, and something worse than a man waited below? But the memory of those eyes drove her down the slope. He was there, exactly as before, but his head hung forward now, chin to chest. For a moment, she thought her fears realized. Then his shoulders rose slightly, breathing. She approached slowly, making deliberate noise so as not to startle him. His head lifted gradually, those blue eyes focusing with difficulty. When he saw her, his whole body went rigid. Not a dream, she said softly, holding up the water skin. I brought water. His voice, when it finally came, sounded like gravel scraping stone. Go, away! But his eyes betrayed him, fixed on the water skin with naked need. She stepped closer, close enough to see the scars where the shackles had rubbed his wrists raw, healed, and rubbed raw again. Close enough to smell the cave smell on him, earth and desperation. I'm going to help you drink, she said, uncapping the water skin. Please don't fight me. The first touch of water on his lips made him gasp. He drank frantically, choking, water running down his beard. She pulled back, waited, let him drink again more slowly. When the skin was half empty, she stopped. Too much will make you sick, she said, remembering a horse they'd nearly lost to colic. He stared at her, and she saw intelligence fighting through the wildness. Why? The word came out cracked. She considered the question, kneeling on the cold stone. Because I know what it is to be property. Something shifted in his expression. He studied her more carefully. Her worn dress, her calloused hands, the bruises on her arms where Clay had grabbed her. What's your name? She asked. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Rowan Tusk. The words seemed to surprise him, as if he'd forgotten the sound of his own name. She paused. What name could she claim? Clay had never given her one. My mother called me Mara. Before. Mara. He tested the word carefully. You shouldn't be here. Mara. He'll kill you. Clay? Rowan's face darkened at the name. He comes sometimes, to look, to gloat. He was one of them that put me here. She pulled out the biscuits, broke one into small pieces. Can you eat? He nodded, and she fed him carefully, piece by piece. His hands, she noticed, were free enough to move slightly, though the chains kept them low. Someone had thought through this imprisonment carefully, enough movement to feed himself if food was thrown within reach, not enough to ever gain leverage on his bonds. 10 years, she said. It wasn't a question. 9 years, 11 months, and... He paused. I lost count of the days. Tried to mark them at first. Stopped mattering. They said you killed a family. His jaw tightened. They said a lot of things. She waited, patient as she'd learned to be. Finally, he spoke again. The Hendersons, good people. I worked their ranch one season, helped bring in their harvest. Someone killed them, whole family, even the young ones. I found the bodies, was trying to bury them when the posse arrived. His voice turned bitter. Drifter with blood on his hands, bodies at his feet. They didn't look for anyone else. But someone would have spoken for you. I had no one, no family, no friends in town. Just another mountain man who'd come down looking for work. They were ready to hang me, but Luther Clay had a better idea. Said death was too quick for a monster. Said the mountain could be my judge. She thought of Clay's satisfied face when he'd mentioned the monster in the cave. He knew you were innocent. Can't prove it now. Doesn't matter. She gave him more water, watched him drink. In the shaft of light from above, she could see he'd once been strong. His frame was large, his hands powerful even in their wasting. What kind of man had he been before the chains? "I have to go," she said finally. "But I'll come back." "Don't." The word came out harsh. "You don't understand. The first year, someone brought food. Old trapper, I think, never spoke. Just threw bread down twice a week. Then he stopped coming. I survived on—" He gestured vaguely at the small bones. "Whatever came close enough. Rainwater when it pooled. You start coming here, you'll get caught. Clay will do worse than kill you." She stood, brushing dirt from her dress. "I know what Clay is capable of." "Do you?" Rowan's eyes blazed suddenly. "He had a wife once, pretty little thing from back east. She used to bring me food, those first months, kind words, to Christian charity, she called it. Then she stopped coming. Clay said she ran off, but I heard her screaming, echoing down the ravine. One night, just the once. Never saw her again." Ice ran through Mara's veins, but she wasn't surprised. She'd learned to read the violence in Clay like weather signs. "I'll be careful," she said. "You'll be dead, and it'll be my fault." "No!" She turned back at the cave mouth. "Whatever happens is Clay's doing, or mine, but not yours." She left before he could protest again. Climbing quickly up the ravine, the forest seemed darker on the return journey, full of watching eyes. Every snapped twig made her freeze. Every bird call sounded like warning. Back at the ranch, she threw herself into her remaining chores with desperate energy. When Clay returned near sunset, red-faced from drink and temper, she was scrubbing the kitchen floor. "Lazy mongrel," he slurred, though he could find no fault with her work. "Get my supper." She served him silently, watching him tear at the venison like an animal. This man had trapped another human being in a cave for 10 years, had likely killed his own wife, and she slept under his roof, lived at his mercy. That night, she lay awake planning. The shackles would have a lock. Clay would have the key. She'd seen his key ring. He wore it always, even slept with it under his pillow. But there had to be another way. There always was. If you were desperate enough. Over the following weeks, she fell into a dangerous pattern. Whenever Clay left the ranch, to town, to check his trap lines, to drink at the tavern in the valley, she would steal away to the cave, sometimes for an hour, sometimes only minutes, but she always went. Rowan fought her kindness at first, telling her to stay away, refusing food, but hunger and isolation had their own logic, and gradually he accepted what she brought. More than food and water, she brought humanity back to him, piece by piece. She learned he'd come from Pennsylvania originally, the son of a blacksmith. He'd headed west after the war. Like so many men seeking something, fortune, freedom, forgetfulness, he'd found the mountains and they'd claimed him, teaching him their ways. He could track elk through snow, read weather in the flight of birds, find water in the driest gulch. "I was free," he said one day, wonder in his voice. "Really free, no man's servant, no town citizen, just me and the mountain." She understood. Freedom was a word she rolled on her tongue like a foreign language, trying to imagine its taste. He asked about her life too, cautiously at first. She told him about the plantation where she'd been born, though she remembered little beyond the smell of cotton and her mother's lullabies. About being sold at 7 to pay debts, passed from owner to owner like furniture. About Clay buying her from a trader who'd grown tired of her silence. "You never tried to run?" "Where would I go? I have no papers saying I'm free, no horse, no money, no knowledge of the land beyond this ranch. At least here I know what each day brings. Prison is prison," Rowan said softly, "whether it's chains or circumstances." One day she brought him something different. A book she'd found in Clay's wife's old room. Poetry. The cover said she couldn't read it, but Rowan could. His voice, growing stronger with use, shaped the words into music. She sat outside the reach of his chains and listened to verses about beauty and freedom and love, things that seemed to belong to another world entirely. "You're giving me back my mind," he said after reading. "I'd forgotten words could do more than curse and beg." "You're giving me hope," she replied. "I'd forgotten it existed. The look that passed between them then was dangerous. She felt it like heat from a forge, warming places in her that had gone cold. His eyes traveled her face like a man memorizing water in the desert. "Mara," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. "When I get out of here—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't make promises. Don't build dreams. We have this now. It's enough." But she was lying. It wasn't enough. Every time she left him in that cave, something tore inside her. Every night in the barn, she thought of him shivering in the dark. Every meal she ate, she wondered when he'd last been full. And underneath it all, growing like a fire in dry grass, was something else. Something that made her pulse quicken when his fingers brushed hers passing the water skin. Something that made her dream of blue eyes and gentle words. She began to search the ranch systematically. In the barn's loft, she found old tools, files that might wear through iron. Given time, in Clay's study, while cleaning, she memorized the layout of his desk, the places he might hide a spare key. She studied the ranch's rhythms, learned when the hands were farthest from the house, when Clay's drinking would keep him unconscious longest. One afternoon, as autumn deepened toward winter, she found something that made her heart race, hidden in the back of a drawer, wrapped in oilcloth, a set of skeleton keys. Old, rusty, but intact. Clay's insurance, perhaps against losing his primary set. She tested them on every lock she could find. Most didn't fit, but she memorized which turned smoothly, which stuck. Hope, that dangerous thing, bloomed in her chest like pain. "I'm going to free you," she told Rowan that day. He gripped her hand through the bars of his need. "You can't. You don't understand what you're risking." "I understand perfectly. I'm risking a life that's no life at all for the chance of something more. Clay will hunt us. Others will too. A escaped convict and a runaway. We'll have every bounty hunter in the territory after us. Then we'll go where they can't follow. You know these mountains." "Mara, please." His voice broke. "I can't watch you die for me. I can't have that on my conscience, too." She squeezed his fingers, feeling the bones beneath the skin, the strength still waiting there. "You won't be watching. You'll be running beside me." That night, she prepared. Extra clothes pilfered from the storage room, dried meat and hardtack hidden in caches along the forest trail, a knife, a length of rope, matches wrapped in wax cloth. She had no experience as a thief, but desperation made her clever. 3 days later, her chance came. Clay announced a trip to Cheyenne, business that would keep him away for a week. The ranch hands would slack off without him there, drinking in the bunkhouse, caring little what the slave girl did as long as meals appeared on time. She waited until midnight of the second day, until snores echoed from the bunkhouse and autumn rain masked any sound. The skeleton keys were cold in her hand as she descended into the gorge one last time as a slave. Rowan was awake, as if he'd sensed her coming. In the darkness, she could barely see him, but she heard his breathing quicken. "Mara, no!" "Yes." She knelt by his wrists, feeling for the lock by touch. The first key didn't fit. The second stuck halfway. The third. The click was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. The shackle fell away from Rowan's wrist with a sound like breaking bones. He stared at his freed hand as if it belonged to someone else, flexing fingers that had known only limited movement for nearly a decade. Mara worked quickly on the other wrist, then moved to his ankles, her hands shaking but determined. When the last chain dropped, Rowan tried to stand and immediately collapsed. His legs, weakened by years of disuse, buckled beneath him. Mara caught him, her slight frame straining under his weight. "I can't," he gasped, shame and desperation in his voice. "Mara, I can't walk." "Yes, you can." She pulled his arm over her shoulders. "We'll go slow. Your body remembers. It just needs time." They struggled out of the cave like the wounded creatures they were. The rain had turned the ravine into a river of mud, and they slipped and slid, clawing their way up. By the time they reached the top, both were filthy and exhausted. But Rowan was on his feet, swaying but standing. "The cache," Mara panted. "Food and supplies, hidden near the lightning-struck pine." They found it, and she helped him into the spare clothes, a rancher's cast-offs. But they fit well enough. He moved like a man relearning his body, each gesture careful and strange. When she handed him the knife, he gripped it and something shifted in his face, a remembering of who he'd been. "Which way?" she asked. He oriented himself, reading the land even in darkness. "North, into the high country. There's a trapper's cabin, abandoned. If it still stands." They moved through the night, Rowan leaning on her less with each mile. The rain was a blessing, washing away their tracks, muffling their passage. By dawn, they'd covered maybe 5 miles, not enough, but all they could manage. They sheltered in a grove of aspens as the sun rose, sharing water and dried meat. In the morning light, Mara could see Rowan clearly for the first time as a free man, beneath the dirt and weathering. He had a strong face, nose bent from an old break, a scar through one eyebrow. His eyes, those blue eyes that had haunted her, now held something new, a fierce, protective light when they looked at her. "You're shivering," he said, and before she could protest, he'd wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. The contact shocked them both. How long since either had been held with kindness? She should have pulled away. They needed to keep moving, but his warmth surrounded her, and she felt muscles she'd held rigid for 3 years begin to soften. She pressed her face into his chest and, for the first time since childhood, allowed herself to cry. "Shh," he murmured into her hair. "You're free now. We're both free." But freedom, they learned, had its own challenges. They pushed north through increasingly difficult terrain. Rowan's mountain knowledge came back in pieces. Which plants could be eaten, where to find water, how to move without leaving sign. But his body betrayed him constantly. Years of confinement had stolen his stamina, his sure-footedness. On the second night, they found the trapper's cabin he'd remembered, a one-room structure of logs and mud. Roof partially collapsed, but one corner still sound. They made camp there, building a small fire in the old stone hearth. "We can't stay long," Rowan said, stretching his legs toward the warmth. "Come daylight after tomorrow, Clay will be back. He'll find you gone, find me gone. He'll know. Let him know." Mara was cleaning the rabbit Rowan had managed to snare, her movements efficient. "What can he do? Tell the law he lost his slave? That his prisoner escaped?" "He'll come himself, with men who don't ask questions." Rowan's face was grim. "I know Luther Clay. He doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget, and he doesn't let go of what he considers his." That night, with bellies full for the first time in memory, they sat close by the fire. The temperature had dropped, and frost painted the windows white. Mara found herself studying Rowan's profile in the firelight, the way his jaw set when he was thinking, how his hands moved when he talked about the mountains. "Tell me about Pennsylvania," she said. He smiled, a rare thing that transformed his face. "Green, so green it hurt your eyes in spring. Hills like waves, not sharp like here. My pa's forge sat by a creek, and I'd fall asleep to the sound of water and his hammer on the anvil." "Why did you leave?" His smile faded. "The war. I went to fight. Came back. Different. Pa was dead. The forge sold. Nothing left but ghosts. So I headed west, figuring I'd lose myself in all that space." He laughed bitterly. "Guess I succeeded." "You're not lost now," she said softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something electric passed between them. His hand moved to her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with impossible gentleness. "Mara," he whispered. A branch snapped outside. They froze, fire warmth turning to ice in their veins. Rowan moved with sudden grace, knife in hand, pushing Mara behind him. They waited, hearts hammering, but no other sound came. A deer, perhaps, or wind, or hope. But the moment had broken something open between them. When they lay down to sleep, backs to the fire, Rowan pulled her close without asking. She fit against him like she'd been carved for that space, his arm heavy and safe across her waist. "I won't let him take you back," he murmured against her neck. "I'll die first." "No one's dying," she said firmly. "We're going to live, Rowan, really live." They pushed harder the next day, climbing into snow country. The cold bit through their thin clothes, but they couldn't risk returning to the valley for supplies. Rowan showed her how to wrap her feet in bark inside her boots, how to spot the sheltered roots that avoided the worst of the wind. But by afternoon, they heard what they dreaded: dogs baying in the distance, but getting closer. "He brought tracking hounds," Rowan said grimly. They stood on a ridge, looking back at the way they'd come. "Smart, always was smart. Give him that." "The creek," Mara said, remembering stories. "Water breaks the scent." "Too late for that. They're too close." Rowan scanned the terrain with desperate eyes. "There, the rocks. If we can make that cliff." They ran, slipping and sliding on icy stone. Behind them, the baying grew louder, and now they could hear men's voices, calling to each other. Mara's lungs burned in the thin air. Her legs shook, but Rowan's hand in hers pulled her onward. The cliff face loomed above them, a sheer wall of granite split by a narrow chimney. Rowan boosted her up, and she climbed, fingers bloody on the rough stone. He followed, and they wedged themselves into the crack just as the first dog burst from the tree line below. 3 hounds circled the base of the cliff, howling their frustration. Then came the men, 4 of them. Clay in the lead, his face red with rage and exertion. "I know you're up there, girl," he shouted. "You and that murdering bastard both. Come down now, and I might not kill you." Mara pressed deeper into the crack, Rowan's body shielding hers. His breath was hot on her neck, his muscles coiled like springs. "She's mine, Tusk," Clay continued. "Bought and paid for, and you're mine too, by rights. 10 years I kept you fed and watered. You owe me." Rowan laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Fed and watered? Like an animal. You owe me 10 years of life. Clay, you owe me for the Hendersons. And I think you owe your wife something too." Clay's face darkened. "You shut your mouth about her." "Did you bury her, at least? Or did you leave her for the coyotes like you left me?" Clay raised his rifle, fired. The bullet sparked off stone inches from Rowan's head, and Mara bit back a scream. "Next one goes in your skull," Clay promised. "Last chance. Send the girl down, and I'll let you run." "Go to hell," Rowan said calmly. What happened next was chaos. Clay ordered his men up the cliff, but the route was treacherous, and they were valley men, not climbers. One fell within minutes, leg bent at an unnatural angle. Another made it halfway before freezing, unable to go up or down. In the confusion, Rowan spotted something, a ledge leading around the cliff face, invisible from below. He nudged Mara, pointed. They began to move, inch by careful inch, while Clay's attention was on his struggling men. They'd almost made it to safer ground when Mara's foot slipped. She swung out over empty air, only Rowan's grip on her wrist keeping her from falling. Clay saw the movement, swung his rifle around. Time slowed. Mara saw Clay's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Rowan's face set in desperate determination. Then Rowan did something impossible. He swung her up and around, putting his body between her and the gun. Just as Clay fired, the impact spun Rowan around. Blood bloomed across his shoulder, but he didn't fall. Instead, he pushed Mara ahead of him, around the corner of the cliff, out of sight. They ran through snow and stone, Rowan's blood leaving a trail they couldn't hide. Behind them, Clay's curses echoed off the mountains, but his men were broken. One injured, one stuck, the third refusing to follow onto the treacherous ledges. Miles later, in a cave barely big enough for 2. Mara tended Rowan's wound with shaking hands. The bullet had passed through the muscle of his shoulder, missing bone and vital vessels. Lucky, if anything about their situation could be called that. "You fool," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You beautiful fool. You could have died." "Worth it," he said through gritted teeth as she bound the wound with strips torn from her petticoat. to keep you safe. Worth anything. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, tasting blood and freedom on his lips. He responded with equal hunger, his good arm pulling her against him. And for a moment, the cave, the cold, the pursuit, all of it fell away. There was only this. Two people who'd found each other in the darkest of places, holding on like drowning souls. When they broke apart, breathless, Rowan touched her face with wonder. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I loved you from the moment you said I'm real in that cave." "I love you too," she whispered. "And I'll keep loving you whether we have days or decades." That night, as snow began to fall outside their shelter, they held each other with careful tenderness. Rowan's wound made anything more impossible, but there was intimacy in the way she curved around him, protecting his injured side, in the way he pressed kisses to her hair, her forehead, her hands. "Tomorrow we go higher," he murmured. "Into the real mountains, places Clay won't follow, can't follow. I know hidden valleys, hot springs, caves that go deep. We'll disappear." "Together," she said. "Together," he agreed. And despite everything, the pain, the cold, the certainty of pursuit, Mara felt something she'd never experienced before. Hope. Real hope. Burning bright as the stars visible through the cave mouth, promising that freedom was more than just a word. She'd freed him from his chains, and he'd freed her from hers. Now they just had to stay free long enough to build a life worth living. The snow that had begun as a whisper became a roar. For 2 days, the blizzard raged, sealing them in the shallow cave like a tomb of white. Rowan's fever spiked the first night, his wound angry and swollen despite Mara's careful tending. She held him through the delirium, his body burning against hers while outside the world disappeared in white fury. "Sarah," he mumbled, lost in fever dreams. "Sarah, I'm sorry. Couldn't save them. The children." Mara pressed cool cloth to his forehead, understanding these were memories of the Henderson family, the murders that had condemned him. His guilt was another chain, one she couldn't unlock with stolen keys. By the second night, his fever broke. He woke to find her curled against him, her face drawn with exhaustion. She'd given him most of their food, most of their water. Her lips were cracked, her hands ice-cold where they rested on his chest. "Mara!" Her name came out as a croak. "You foolish woman. You're half frozen." She stirred, eyes fluttering open. The relief in them when she saw him lucid made his chest tight. "You're back," she whispered. "Thanks to you." He pulled her closer with his good arm, trying to share what warmth he had. The storm? Still blowing, but weaker now. They lay in silence, listening to the wind. Their food was gone, water nearly so. When the storm broke, they'd have to move or starve. But for now, in this small space carved from stone, they had each other. "Tell me something," Mara said against his chest. "Something good, something from before," Rowan thought, sifting through memories like a prospector panning for gold. "There was a summer," he said finally. "My second year in the mountains. I found a valley no white man had seen, full of wildflowers, every color you could imagine. And in the center, a pool so clear you could see straight to the bottom, fed by a waterfall that caught the light like diamonds. Take me there," she murmured. "When this is over." "I will. We'll build a cabin, plant a garden. No one will find us." She was quiet so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, "Do you think we're bad people, Rowan, for wanting this, for choosing each other over?" She gestured vaguely at the world beyond the cave. He considered carefully. "I think we're people who've paid enough for other folks' ideas of good and bad. Maybe it's time we decided for ourselves." When the storm finally exhausted itself, they emerged into a world transformed. The snow lay thick and pristine, erasing all sign of their passage. But it also made travel treacherous, each step a struggle through drifts that reached Mara's waist. They'd gone less than a mile when they heard the shot. It cracked across the mountain stillness, followed by another. Not aimed at them, too distant, but a signal. Clay hadn't given up. "He's brought more men," Rowan said grimly. "Probably promised a bounty." They pushed harder, but the snow and Rowan's injury made speed impossible. By afternoon, they could hear voices carrying on the thin air. Multiple search parties spread across the mountain, tightening the net. That's when they saw the riders. 3 men on horseback, cutting across the slope below them. Not Clay's men. These wore uniform dusters and badges that caught the sun. Federal marshals. "Down!" Rowan hissed, pulling Mara behind a boulder. They watched the marshals pass, close enough to see their faces, hear their conversation. "Waste of time, if you ask me." One was saying, "Man's been chained up 10 years. He's probably dead in this snow." "Orders are orders," replied another. "The territorial governor wants him found. Bad for Wyoming's reputation, having prisoners escape, especially murderers." They waited until the marshals were specks in the distance before moving. But now they understood the full weight of their situation. Not just Clay hunting them, but the law itself. As dusk approached, exhausted and desperate, they stumbled upon Salvation, a narrow crack in the mountainside. Hidden behind a fall of rocks, Rowan investigated, then beckoned Mara forward. "It opens up inside," he said. "Goes back a ways. We can hide. Rest." The crack led to a cave system, dark but dry. They felt their way deep enough to be invisible from outside, then collapsed against the stone wall. In the blackness, they clung to each other, breathing hard. "I can't go much further," Mara admitted, hating the weakness in her voice. "I'm sorry. Don't." Rowan's hand found her face in the dark. "You've been strong enough for both of us. Rest now." They dozed fitfully, waking to the sound of voices outside the cave. Clay's voice, raised in anger. "They came this way. I'm sure of it. Check every hole, every overhang." Footsteps crunched in the snow outside their hiding place. Mara held her breath, pressed against Rowan, feeling his heart race to match hers. A shadow fell across the cave entrance. Someone was peering in, trying to see into the darkness. "Nothing here," the man called. "Moving on." They stayed frozen for hours after the voices faded, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loud. When they finally crept to the entrance, full dark had fallen. The moon was new, the stars hidden by clouds. "We move now," Rowan decided. "In the dark. It's our only chance." What followed was a nightmare journey, blind in the darkness. They felt their way down the mountain, every step a potential fall, every sound a possible pursuer. Mara's dress caught and tore on unseen branches. Rowan's wound reopened, fresh blood soaking the makeshift bandage. Near dawn, they literally stumbled into their salvation, a mining camp, abandoned but not empty. Supplies left behind by prospectors who'd given up on finding gold in these harsh mountains. Canned goods, blankets, even a rusty rifle with a handful of cartridges. They holed up in the most intact shack, wolfing down cold beans, wrapping themselves in musty blankets. For the first time in days, they felt something like hope. "We could stay here," Mara suggested. "Wait them out," but Rowan shook his head. "They'll find this place eventually. All the old camps are marked on maps." He was cleaning the rifle, checking its action. "But it gives us what we needed, supplies, a weapon. Now we can really run." That day they rested, gathering strength and supplies. As the sun set, painting the mountains blood red, they prepared to move again. That's when Mara made a decision that had been building in her heart. "I want to be your wife," she said suddenly. Rowan stopped loading the pack, turned to stare at her. "Mara, not legally. I know we can't. But here, now, before God and these mountains, I want the word said." Understanding dawned in his eyes. They might not survive. This might be their only chance. He took her hands, his own trembling slightly. "I don't know the proper words." "Then use your own." In that abandoned shack, with the mountains as their church and the wind as their choir, they made their vows. Simple words, honest words. To love, to protect, to choose each other above all else, to face whatever came, together. When Rowan kissed her, it was different from before, deeper, claiming and being claimed. And when he drew her down onto the pile of blankets, when clothes fell away despite the cold, it was as natural as breathing. They came together with desperate tenderness, aware of wounds both physical and spiritual. Mara had known brutality disguised as intimacy. Rowan had been alone so long he'd forgotten gentle touch. But here, now, they found something new, something that belonged only to them. His hands shook as they mapped her body, reverent as a man touching something holy. She guided him with soft sounds, showing him what brought pleasure instead of pain. When they joined, it was with eyes open, watching each other's faces in the dim light. "My wife," he breathed against her lips. "My husband," she answered, and felt the words remake her, forge her into something new. They moved together slowly, savoring each sensation, each moment of connection. The world outside, the hunters, the snow, the uncertain future, fell away. There was only this, skin against skin, breath mingling with breath, hearts beating as one. When release came, it was with tears as much as pleasure. They held each other after, unwilling to separate even as the cold crept back in. This was what they were fighting for. Not just survival, but this, the right to choose each other, to love without permission or approval. "I would do it all again," Mara whispered. "Every moment of suffering, if it led me to you." "You saved me," Rowan replied, pressing kisses to her hair. "In every way a person can be saved." They dozed briefly, then rose and dressed as the moon climbed the sky. Time to run again, but different now. No longer fugitive and slave fleeing separately into the night, but husband and wife facing the wilderness together. As they left the mining camp, packs full of supplies, rifle loaded and ready, Mara looked back once. Somewhere in that ramshackle collection of buildings, they'd left behind their old selves. The slave girl and the chained man were gone. In their place stood two people who'd claimed their freedom with blood and suffering, who'd found love in the midst of flight. "Ready?" Rowan asked, offering his hand. She took it, lacing their fingers together. Ready, they walked into the night, into the unknown, into whatever fate awaited them, but they walked together, and that made all the difference. Behind them, the wind erased their footprints, as if they'd never been there at all. Ahead, the mountains rose like promises, hiding valleys where two people might disappear, might build a life worth living. And somewhere in the distance, wolves howled. Not hunting, just singing to the stars about wildness and freedom and the fierce joy of running with your chosen mate through the endless night. The ghost town of Silver Creek sat in a bowl between two peaks. Forgotten by all but the wind, they stumbled upon it after 3 days of hard travel, when exhaustion blurred the line between waking and dreams. The buildings stood like broken teeth against the sky, a church with its steeple caved in, a saloon with doors hanging askew, homes that had once sheltered dreams of fortune now sheltering only dust and memories. "Gold Rush Town," Rowan said, reading the signs. "Probably went bust 5, maybe 6 years back." They explored cautiously, rifle ready, but found only echoes. In the general store, goods still lined some shelves, canned peaches gone black with age, bolts of cloth eaten by moths, tools rusted but serviceable. The hotel stood 3 stories tall, its grand facade mocking its empty windows. "We could stay a few days," Mara suggested, running her hand along a dusty counter. "Rest properly, let your shoulder heal." Rowan nodded slowly. The infection from his wound had returned, leaving him fevered and weak, though he tried to hide it. They needed shelter, time to recover their strength before the final push into the deep mountains. They chose a house on the edge of town, small but solid, with a working chimney and walls that kept out the wind. As Mara built a fire, Rowan barricaded the doors and windows, old habits from a man who'd learned to never feel safe. That night, warm for the first time in memory, they allowed themselves to pretend. Mara found a dented pot and cooked a real meal from their supplies. Rowan discovered a cache of books in the parlor, pages yellowed but readable. They ate by the fire like any married couple. discussing nothing more pressing than whether to read poetry or adventure tales. "This could have been our life," Mara said softly, looking around the modest room. "If we'd met differently, if the world was different." "It still can be," Rowan insisted. "Once we reach the high valleys, once they stop looking." But they both heard the lie in it. Men like Clay didn't stop looking. The law didn't forget escaped murderers. Their dream of a hidden valley was just that, a dream to sustain them through the nightmare. Over the following days, they fell into a domestic rhythm that felt both foreign and achingly right. Mara tended Rowan's wound with hot water and whiskey found in the saloon, watching with relief as the angry red faded to healing pink. Rowan repaired the house's shutters, chopped wood, made the shelter more secure. In the abandoned church, they found a trunk of clothing, donations for miners who'd never claimed them. Mara traded her torn dress for sturdy pants and a man's shirt, braiding her hair and tucking it under a hat. The transformation was startling. "You make a handsome boy," Rowan teased, then grew serious. "It's good. Safer. A man and woman traveling together draws notice. Two men, less so." They practiced her walk, lowering her voice, the subtle arts of deception that might save their lives. But at night, in their borrowed bed, she was all woman, and he worshipped her with touches that grew more confident, more knowing. It was during their 5th night in Silver Creek that Rowan told her about his lost love. "Her name was Catherine," he said, staring into the fire. "A school teacher in Laramie, hair like wheat, laugh like bells. I was going to marry her." Mara lay quiet beside him, knowing he needed to speak these ghosts aloud. "She was the one who accused me," he continued. "Said she'd seen me near the Henderson place that night. Later, I learned Clay had been courting her, promising her things I couldn't. A fine house, status, security. All she had to do was point her finger at the drifter who'd been fool enough to trust her." "I'm sorry," Mara whispered. "Don't be. If she hadn't betrayed me, I'd never have found you." He pulled her close. "Maybe everything breaks so something better can grow in the cracks." The next morning brought troubling discoveries. Fresh horse tracks at the town's edge, a cigarette butt still warm. Someone had been here. Recently? "Scouts," Rowan said grimly. "Checking the old settlements. We've stayed too long." They packed quickly but carefully, taking everything useful they could carry. As they prepared to leave, Mara stopped at the church threshold. "Wait," she said. "Inside, before the broken altar." She knelt. Rowan joined her, understanding. They'd made vows in a mining shack, but here was a proper church, wounded but standing. Here they could ask for blessings they'd never received. Mara spoke first, her voice steady. "Lord, we know we've sinned, stolen, run, chosen each other over the laws of men, but you made us with hearts that yearn for freedom and souls that seek their match. If that's wrong, then we accept the consequences. Just let us face them together." Rowan added his own prayer. Simpler. "Thank you for sending her to me. Whatever happens next, that was enough." They rose, and in the dusty light streaming through broken windows, shared a kiss that tasted of promises and farewells. The trail out of Silver Creek led higher into country so rough even desperate men might hesitate. They climbed through forests of bristlecone pine, ancient trees twisted by centuries of wind. The air grew thin, each breath a labor. On the 2nd day, Mara's strength began to fail. The altitude, the constant flight, the meager rations, all took their toll. She stumbled more frequently, her face gray with exhaustion. "Just a little farther," Rowan encouraged, arm around her waist. "There's a place I know, sacred to the Shoshone. They won't follow us there." But as they crested a ridge, their hearts sank. Below, spread across the valley like ants, were riders, dozens of them, methodically searching every grove, every potential shelter. "How?" Mara gasped. "Money," Rowan said bitterly. "Clay must have put up a fortune. Every bounty hunter and unemployed soldier in the territory." They backtracked, seeking another route, but the net was closing. That night, huddled in a cave barely large enough for one. They faced the truth. "They're going to catch us," Mara said. It wasn't a question. "Not if we separate. You take the rifle, head east. Your disguise is good. You could make it to—" "No." The word came out sharp as winter wind. "You told Clay once you'd die before letting him take me back. Well, I'll die before I leave you." "Mara." She kissed him silent, fierce and desperate. "We run together or not at all." That's what the vows meant. In the morning, they made their choice. Instead of running, they climbed, straight up, toward peaks where horses couldn't follow, where only those willing to risk everything might venture. The pursuit came faster than expected. They were traversing a narrow ledge when the shots began. Rock exploded near Rowan's head. Mara dropped flat, pulling him down. "Give up, Tusk!" The voice echoed off stone. "You're surrounded." They were. Men above and below. The ledge their only path. But Rowan had spent years studying the mountains from his cave, memorizing every fold and shadow. He saw what the hunters didn't, a chimney in the rock, nearly vertical but climbable. "Can you make it?" he asked Mara. She looked at the crack rising into mist, then at him. "Can you?" His shoulders screamed as they climbed, blood seeping through the bandage. Mara led, finding handholds, calling back warnings. Bullets whined off stone, but the angle was bad for their pursuers. They'd climbed perhaps 50 feet when Rowan's strength gave out. His fingers loosened, body sagging. For a heartbeat, he hung by one hand, death yawning below. Then Mara was there, grabbing his wrist, hauling with strength born of desperation. "Don't you dare," she snarled. "Don't you dare leave me." He found purchase, pushed upward. They climbed through pain, through exhaustion, through shots that came closer as the hunters found better positions. The top seemed impossibly far. That's when they heard new voices, shouting, but not at them. The crack of rifles, but aimed elsewhere. Confusion below. Men yelling contradictory orders. "Indians!" someone screamed. "We're under attack!" But Rowan, even exhausted, knew better. These weren't war cries, but something else. Through the chaos came a voice he recognized. Marshal Tom Brennan, one of the few honest lawmen in the territory. "Federal marshals, drop your weapons! Clay, you're under arrest!" The hunters scattered like quail, torn between prey above and authority below. In the confusion, Mara and Rowan gained the ridge top, collapsing on solid ground. Far below, they could see the drama unfolding, marshals rounding up Clay's hired guns. Clay himself red-faced and shouting, "How?" Mara panted. "I don't know." Rowan pulled her away from the edge. "But we're not waiting to find out." They ran along the ridge as shouts echoed below. Whatever had brought the marshals, it had given them a chance. They took it, plunging down the far side of the mountain into a valley Rowan had only dreamed of reaching. As dusk painted the peaks purple, they stopped by a stream to drink and rest. In the distance, they could still hear pursuit, but fainter now, confused. "Do you think we'll make it?" Mara asked. Rowan gathered her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I think we already have. Every day since you unlocked those chains has been a gift. If it ends tomorrow, I'll still be grateful." "It's not ending tomorrow," she said firmly. "Or the next day. We're going to live. Rowan, really live. Have children, grow old, die in our beds at 90. He smiled at her fierce optimism. "Yes, ma'am." That night, as they made cold camp in a grove of aspens, Mara felt the first flutter in her belly, so faint she might have imagined it. But her hands went instinctively to her stomach. She said nothing. Time enough for that revelation when they were truly safe. But as she curled against Rowan's warmth, she allowed herself to dream of a child born free, knowing no chains but love. The mountains stretched endlessly before them, full of hiding places and hard living. Behind them, the law and lawless alike searched in frustration. But here, now, two people who'd found each other in the darkness held tight and refused to let go. Whatever morning brought, they would meet it together. The federal marshal who changed everything was named Isaac Ward. He arrived at their makeshift camp 3 days after the chaos on the mountain, approaching openly with his hands visible, badge glinting in the morning sun. "Don't shoot," he called out. "I'm alone. Just want to talk." Rowan kept the rifle trained on him while Mara watched from cover. Ward was a tall man, graying at the temples, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years reading the truth in people's faces. "That's close enough," Rowan said. Ward stopped, settling onto a boulder with careful movements. "You're a hard man to find. Mr. Tusk. Been tracking you for a week. Come to bring me in?" "Maybe. Depends on what you have to say." Ward pulled out a tobacco pouch, taking his time. "See, I've been investigating Luther Clay for months now. Man's got a lot of enemies. Amazing what they'll tell a federal badge when they think it might bring him down." Mara's hand found Rowan's arm, a silent warning to listen. "Found some interesting things," Ward continued. "Like how Clay's first wife had family back east. Family that never heard from her after she wrote saying she was afraid of her husband. Found a witness who saw Clay buying chains and shackles the same day you were supposedly caught. Funny thing for a rancher to need. What do you want?" Rowan's voice was tight. "The truth. All of it. In writing. Sworn before me as a federal officer." Ward's eyes were steady. "In exchange, I might have news about those murders you were accused of." The silence stretched like a held breath. "Finally." Rowan lowered the rifle. "And if I don't like your news, then you shoot me and keep running. But I'm betting you're tired of that." They built up the fire, Mara emerging to join them. Ward's eyes widened slightly, seeing her dressed as a man. But he said nothing. As coffee boiled, he laid out what he'd learned. Found a man in Colorado. Horse thief doing 20 years. Got drunk. Started bragging about jobs he'd pulled, including killing a family in Wyoming on Clay's orders. Seems they wouldn't sell their water rights. Rowan's hands trembled. "The Hendersons?" "That's right. Clay wanted their land. They wouldn't sell, so he paid this man to solve the problem, then made sure you took the blame. 2 birds, 1 stone. Got the land cheap from the county and got rid of a man his wife had been bringing food to. Elizabeth." Rowan's voice was hollow. "She was kind. Too kind. In Clay's view." Ward's face darkened. "We found her, by the way. What was left, buried shallow near the old mine. Her family identified a ring." Mara made a soft sound of grief. She'd never known Elizabeth Clay, but she knew what it meant to be a woman at Luther's mercy. Ward pulled out paper and pen. "I need everything. The false imprisonment, the conditions, who helped him, names, dates, whatever you remember. And you, Miss..." He looked at Mara. "I'll need your statement about your time as Clay's property." They talked through the day, Ward writing steadily. Rowan's decade of imprisonment told in detail that made the marshal's face go stone hard. Mara's years of bondage, the beatings, the forced labor, the constant fear, the escape, the pursuit. Clay's threats. He brought slaves into Wyoming territory. Ward muttered. "Federal crime. That, add murder, false imprisonment, conspiracy." He looked up. "You 2 are the witnesses I've been praying for." "And then what?" Mara asked. "We testify, and every bounty hunter in the territory knows where to find us." Ward considered this. "There's another way. I take these sworn statements back, file charges based on them and the other evidence. Clay goes to trial, but you 2... He gestured at the mountains. "Far as I'm concerned, I never found you. Tusk died in that cave. The girl disappeared. No one to contradict that." "Why?" Rowan's suspicion was sharp. "Why help us?" "Because justice and law aren't always the same thing." Ward's eyes were distant. "My brother came back from the war, changed, killed a man in a fight, got sentenced to hang. I was young, believed in rules. Let them take him." He paused. "Month later, found out the man he killed had been attacking a freedwoman. Judge knew, jury knew, didn't care. My brother died for doing right." He stood, tucking the statements away. "Clay's going down. That much I promise. Whether you're there to see it is your choice." That night, after Ward left, Mara and Rowan sat by the fire in stunned silence. The possibility of actual justice, of Clay paying for his crimes, seemed as foreign as flying. "Do you trust him?" Mara asked. "I don't know. But what he said about Elizabeth..." Rowan's jaw tightened. "If there's a chance Clay will hang for her murder, don't I owe her that?" Mara took his hand. "We owe her memory, but not our lives." They decided to wait, to watch. They moved camp higher into the mountains, but stayed close enough to get news. It came 2 weeks later, carried by a prospector they traded with. Luther Clay had been arrested. Federal marshals had descended on his ranch like avenging angels, finding evidence of numerous crimes. His hired guns had scattered or turned evidence. The territorial newspapers were full of scandal. The respectable rancher revealed as a murderer, kidnapper, and worse. "They say he kept a man chained in a cave." The prospector gossiped, unaware who he was talking to. 10 years, like something out of a Gothic novel, and that poor wife of his, killed and buried like a dog. Course, he claims innocence. More news trickled in over the following weeks. Clay's trial was set for spring in Cheyenne. Federal prosecutors were confident. The horse thief from Colorado had been brought to testify. Other witnesses were coming forward, people who'd been too frightened to speak before, but with the news came a problem. Mara's sickness, which she'd attributed to poor food and altitude, grew worse. She could barely keep food down, was exhausted by noon, when she fainted while gathering firewood. Rowan carried her back to their shelter, white-faced with fear. "You need a doctor. I need rest," she insisted, but her hands went unconsciously to her belly. Rowan saw the gesture, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "Mara, are you—" She nodded, tears starting. "I think so. 2 months, maybe 3. He pulled her against him, emotions warring on his face, joy, terror, wonder, fear. "A baby, our baby. Born free," she whispered, "like we promised." But freedom in the mountains was one thing. Raising a child required more than hiding in caves and abandoned camps. They needed shelter, stability, safety, and Mara needed care no mountain herbs could provide. They made the decision together. They would risk going to a town, finding help, not a large town where questions would be asked, but one of the mining settlements that dotted the territory, places where people minded their own business if you had coin to pay. They chose Copper Falls, a day's ride from their camp. Rowan went alone first, selling furs they'd trapped, buying supplies. He found a midwife, a stern German woman named Mrs. Hoffman, who asked no questions when paid in advance. "My wife is delicate," he said carefully. "We live remotely. She needs care." Mrs. Hoffman studied him with sharp eyes. "I help women, not their problems. You understand?" He understood. She would come, would help Mara, would keep silent. When he returned to camp, he found Marshal Ward waiting. "Easy," Ward said as Rowan reached for his gun. "Still just talking? How do you keep finding us?" Ward smiled slightly. "I'm good at my job. But don't worry. If I can find you, I can lose you too. Came to warn you. Clay's lawyer is pushing to have you both found, brought in to testify. Says without you, it's all hearsay. We gave statements. Not enough. He wants to face his accusers. His right, legally speaking." Mara emerged from their shelter, no longer able to hide her condition. Ward's eyes widened slightly. "Ah," he said, "that complicates things. We won't testify," Mara said firmly. "Not in person. Too dangerous." Ward nodded slowly. "Figured as much. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to report that I found evidence of your deaths. Avalanche up near Devil's Peak. Bodies unrecoverable. Tragic end to a tragic story." "Why help us?" This from Mara. "Because that baby deserves a chance. Because you two have paid enough. And because..." His face hardened. "Clay's going down, with or without you. We found 3 more bodies on his property. Man was a monster, and everyone knows it now. He left them with a warning to move farther north, maybe into Montana territory. Start fresh where no one knew their faces. And a gift. Official death certificates. backdated and properly filed. "You're ghosts now," he said. "Make the most of it." The trial began in March. They heard echoes of it even in their isolation. Clay convicted of Elizabeth's murder, of conspiracy in the Henderson killings, of federal crimes related to slavery. Sentenced to hang. "Do you want to go?" Mara asked. "To see?" Rowan considered, then shook his head. "He's dead to me already. Has been since you unlocked those chains." Mara was near her time now. Belly round under the warm clothes they'd traded for. They'd found an abandoned trapper's cabin, sturdy and isolated, and made it a home of sorts. Mrs. Hoffman visited weekly, teaching Rowan what he'd need to know, preparing for a birth with no doctor for 50 miles. It was during a late spring snowstorm that the pains began. Rowan sent the signal, smoke from a particular peak, and Mrs. Hoffman arrived within hours, bustling and efficient. "First babies take time," she announced. "You pace. Papa, make yourself useful." What followed was the longest night of Rowan's life. Mara's cries echoed off the cabin walls while he could do nothing but tend the fire and pray. He who'd faced down bears and survived 10 years in chains felt helpless before this primal struggle. Dawn was breaking when the baby's cry joined Mara's. Mrs. Hoffman emerged, blood on her apron, but smiling. "A girl, healthy. Mother is tired but well." Rowan stumbled into the bedroom to find Mara propped against pillows, a tiny bundle in her arms. Her face was exhausted but radiant. "Come meet your daughter," she whispered. The baby was perfect. Tiny fingers, rosebud mouth, a shock of dark hair. When Rowan took her, his hands trembling, she opened her eyes, blue as mountain sky. "What should we call her?" Mara asked. Rowan thought of all they'd been through, all they'd survived, of chains broken and freedom claimed, of love found in the darkest places. "Hope," he said. "Hope, Elizabeth Tusk." Mara smiled through her tears. "Hope, yes." As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow gold, they held their daughter between them, somewhere far away. Luther Clay was facing his judgment, but here, in this small cabin, a new life had begun. A child who would know no chains, own no masters, fear no hunters, born free, as promised, born to parents who'd paid in blood and suffering for the right to love her without permission or apology. The future stretched uncertain before them. They would need new names, new stories, a new life built on the ashes of the old. But they had survived the impossible. They had found each other in the darkness and refused to let go. Now they had hope. It was enough. It was everything. The day Luther Clay came for them began like any other. Hope was 3 months old, sleeping in the cradle Rowan had carved from pine. Mara was tending the garden they'd planted behind the cabin, coaxing life from the mountain soil. The morning sun painted everything gold, peaceful as a prayer. Then the birds went silent. Rowan, splitting wood by the creek, felt it first, that prickle of wrongness that had kept him alive through years of wilderness living. He set down his axe, scanning the tree line. Nothing visible, but every instinct screamed danger. He moved toward the cabin, careful to seem unhurried. Mara looked up from her plants, read his face, and rose without a word. They'd practiced this, planned for it, prayed it would never come. Inside, Mara gathered hope while Rowan barred the door and checked the rifle. Through the window, he saw movement in the trees, multiple men spreading out to surround the cabin. "How?" Mara whispered, clutching the baby. Then a voice they both knew, thought they'd never hear again, rang across the clearing. "I know you're in there, girl. You and that murdering bastard both. Luther Clay. Not hanged, not imprisoned, free and here." Rowan's mind raced. Ward had sworn Clay was convicted, sentenced to death. What had gone wrong? Surprised? Clay continued. Closer now. Money's a wonderful thing. Buys lawyers, judges, even federal marshals. That fool Ward never knew who he was really working for. Betrayal hit like a physical blow. Ward, who'd seemed so honest, who'd given them death certificates and hope. Had it all been a trap? Here's what's going to happen. Clay called. "You send out my property. That's you, girl, and the baby. Do it now, and I might let Tusk die quick." Hope began to cry. Sensing the tension, Mara rocked her, tears streaming down her face. They were trapped, outnumbered, with a baby who made flight impossible. "Check the back," Rowan whispered. But Mara's peek through the rear window confirmed it. Men there too, rifles ready. Clay had learned from their previous escapes. "1 minute," Clay shouted. "Then we burn you out." Rowan gripped Mara's shoulders. "Take Hope. Go to him. Live." "No!" Her voice was steel. "We decided, together or not at all." That was before her. That was forever. She passed him the baby, checking her own pistol. "If we die free, all of us." The first torch hit the roof, flames catching in the dry shingles. Smoke began seeping through the ceiling. Hope wailed, and Mara took her back, pressing the baby's face to her chest to filter the air. Rowan smashed the window. Firing at shapes in the smoke, return fire splintered the walls around them. The heat grew unbearable, flames eating through the roof beams. "Out the back," Rowan decided. "Better to die fighting than burn." They prepared to charge, to meet death head-on, when new gunfire erupted outside. Not aimed at the cabin, at Clay's men. Shouts of confusion, the thunder of horses. Through the smoke, Rowan saw riders pouring into the clearing. Not lawmen, Indians, Shoshone warriors, painted for battle, cutting through Clay's hired guns like a scythe through wheat. "Now!" Rowan kicked open the back door. They ran, Mara shielding Hope, Rowan covering their retreat. The battle raged behind them, war cries mixing with screams. A figure loomed from the smoke, one of Clay's men. Rifle raised. Before Rowan could react, an arrow sprouted from the man's chest. A Shoshone warrior emerged, fierce and familiar. Rowan recognized him, Joseph Two Eagles, a man he'd traded with years before, back when he'd been free in these mountains. "This way!" Joseph shouted in English. "Quickly!" They followed, plunging into the forest as their cabin collapsed in flames behind them. Joseph led them to horses, helped Mara mount with the baby. "Why?" Rowan gasped as they rode. "The white man's law failed." Joseph replied grimly. "The spirits told us justice must be done another way. Clay spilled innocent blood on sacred land. The mountain demands payment." They rode hard through hidden trails, the sounds of battle fading behind them. When they finally stopped at a hidden camp, Rowan realized the magnitude of what had happened. The Shoshone had risked everything to save them. "Clay?" he asked. Joseph's face was stone. "The mountain took him. His men scattered like rabbits. They will speak of ghosts and vengeance, nothing more." As the adrenaline faded, questions tumbled out. Joseph explained. Ward had been genuine, but Clay had resources Ward never imagined. Bribes, threats, blackmail. The hanging had been postponed, then commuted, then overturned entirely on technicalities. Clay had walked free and immediately set about hunting them. But he made a mistake. Joseph said, "He brought violence to sacred ground." And we remembered the man who once helped our people, who respected our ways. He looked at Rowan. Debts must be balanced. They spent 3 days with the Shoshone, resting, planning. Hope charmed the women, who cooed over her and taught Mara medicines for childhood ailments. But they couldn't stay. The massacre of Clay's men would bring soldiers, questions, retaliation. "Go north," Joseph advised. "Far north, into Canada. Start new. The child deserves peace." As they prepared to leave, an old woman approached Mara. She pressed a small leather pouch into her hands. Speaking in Shoshone, Joseph translated, "For the child, protection and blessing. She says the little one has a strong spirit, born from courage." They parted at dawn, the Shoshone melting back into the mountains like smoke. Rowan and Mara, dressed in clothing provided by their saviors, began the long journey north. Hope rode in a cradleboard on Mara's back, quiet and alert. The news reached them weeks later in a trading post. A massacre in the mountains. Luther Clay and 8 hired guns dead, killed by hostiles according to the lone survivor. The army was increasing patrols. Settlers were arming themselves, fear spreading like wildfire. But buried in the local paper was another item. Marshal Isaac Ward had been found murdered in Cheyenne, shot in the back. His personal papers revealed he'd been investigating corruption in the territorial government, judges and officials taking bribes. He was honest after all, Mara said softly. And it killed him. Rowan's voice was bitter, just like it nearly killed us. They pressed on, always north, through Montana territory, skirting towns, trading with trappers and natives who asked no questions. Hope grew despite the hardships, learning to crawl in meadows, saying her first word, "Pa," by a campfire under stars. At the border, they faced a choice: cross illegally, risking capture, or present themselves at a checkpoint with their fabricated identities. They chose boldness, becoming Thomas and Mary Frost, homesteaders from Nebraska seeking opportunity in Manitoba. The border agent barely glanced at their papers, more interested in warning them about the harsh winters ahead. As they crossed into Canada, Mara wept, tears of relief, exhaustion, and something like joy. They found land near a settlement called Pine Falls. Good soil, despite the cold, timber for building, a creek that sang year-round. The other settlers were a mix, Europeans fleeing their own troubles, Americans seeking fresh starts, natives who'd been there forever. No one asked about pasts. Building their new cabin was different from before. This time, they built for permanence. Stone foundation, thick walls, windows that faced sunrise and sunset, a room for hope. Space for the other children they dared to dream of. The first winter nearly broke them. Temperatures that made Wyoming seem tropical. Snow that buried their cabin to the eaves. But they survived, learning from neighbors, adapting. Hope took her first steps on snowshoes Rowan made, laughing at her own clumsiness. Spring brought validation of their choice. A letter reached them through twisting channels. Mrs. Hoffman, the midwife, writing to say she'd heard of their survival, their escape. She enclosed newspaper clippings. The Indian massacre had exposed a web of corruption in Wyoming. Clay's death had loosened tongues. Officials were resigning, fleeing, being arrested. Justice in the end. Mara said, "Not justice." Rowan corrected. "Balance. The mountain took its due." They planted their first Canadian crop that spring. Wheat and potatoes. Cabbage and carrots. Things that could survive the climate. Like they had. Hope toddled between the rows, helping by pulling up seedlings until Mara redirected her to collecting stones. One evening, as they sat watching Hope chase fireflies, or attempt to, with toddler coordination, Mara took Rowan's hand. "I'm pregnant again," she said simply. His joy was quieter this time, tempered by experience. They'd learned how fragile happiness could be, how quickly safety could shatter. But still, joy. "Another child born free," he said. "All our children will be," Mara replied firmly. "That's why we survived, to break the chain." As night fell, they carried Hope inside, the child protesting sleepily about abandoned fireflies. In her small bed, she curled up with the leather pouch the Shoshone woman had given her, her constant companion, her protection. Rowan and Mara lay together, listening to their daughter's breathing, feeling new life quicken between them. Outside, the Canadian wilderness stretched endless and full of promise. They'd traveled so far from that cave in Wyoming, that ranch where humanity was property, paid in blood and terror for this quiet moment. "Do you regret it?" Mara asked in the darkness. "Everything we've lost?" Rowan considered. His decade in chains, her years as property, the constant running, the violence, the fear, Clay's blood on sacred ground, all of it leading to this, a cabin in a foreign land. New names, the past buried like bodies. "I regret nothing that brought me to you," he said finally. "To this." She pressed closer, her hand over his heart. "The children will never know. Should we tell them? Someday? When they're ready. When they need to understand why freedom matters." They slept then, wrapped in each other and the fragile peace they'd built from ashes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, crops to tend, a home to maintain, a new child to prepare for. But tonight, They were simply the Frost family of Pine Falls, Manitoba, anonymous, alive, free. The mountains had tested them, broken them, remade them. Now the prairie would shape them into something new, not fugitives, but farmers, not escaped slaves, but citizens, not Rowan and Mara, but Thomas and Mary, parents of hope and the children yet to come. The past was a cave in Wyoming, dark and full of chains. The future was this wide Canadian sky, endless as promise, bright as their daughter's laughter. They'd chosen the sky. It was enough. 5 years passed like seasons in their new land. The Frost family farm prospered through brutal winters and brief summers. Hope grew tall and wild. Her brother Samuel toddled after her through wheat fields, and baby Elizabeth slept in the same carved cradle that had crossed mountains and borders. On this particular morning, Mara, now fully Mary Frost to everyone but Rowan in their private moments, stood at her kitchen window watching the sunrise paint the prairie gold. Her hands, once raw from slavery, now bore the gentler calluses of her own chosen work. She was kneading bread when Hope burst through the door. "Mama, Papa says come quick, there's a man!" Fear, never fully buried, sparked in Mara's chest. But when she reached the barn, she found Rowan calmly talking to a stranger, old, weathered, clearly having traveled far. "Mary," Rowan said carefully, "this is Mr. Jameson. He's looking for his daughter." The old man's eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. "Been searching 2 years," he said. "My Catherine, she ran off with some no-good drifter. Heard rumors they came north." Mara's blood chilled. Catherine, the name from Rowan's past, the woman who'd betrayed him. She saw the same recognition in Rowan's carefully neutral face. "Lots of Catherines in Canada." Rowan said mildly. "What makes you think she's here?" "Letter," the man said, pulling out a worn paper. "Got it 6 months ago. No return address, but postmarked from Pine Falls. Just said she was alive, had children, was sorry for everything." Hope tugged at Mara's skirt. "Mama, why is the man sad?" "Hush, dear one." Mara smoothed her daughter's hair, mind racing. Catherine, here, the woman whose lies had cost Rowan 10 years in chains. "I'll ask around," Rowan promised. "Where are you staying?" After Jameson left for the boarding house in town, Mara and Rowan stood in tense silence. "It could be coincidence," Mara said finally. "It's not." Rowan's voice was flat. "The Weatherbys. That farm 2 valleys over. The woman never comes to town. Husband does all the trading. Right age, right look. You've known? Suspected. Didn't matter. That life is dead." But Mara heard the old pain underneath. "What will you do?" He looked at their children playing in the yard, at the life they'd built. "Nothing. Thomas Frost has no quarrel with anyone. But fate wasn't finished with its tricks." 3 days later, at the general store, Mara literally ran into a woman carrying a baby. Packages scattered. Apologies flowed. And then both women froze. It was Catherine, no doubt, older, harder, but those same wheat-colored hair and bell-like voice that Rowan had once described. Her eyes widened in recognition, not of Mara specifically, but of what she was, a woman of color, married to a white man, in this small town where gossip traveled like wildfire. I'm sorry," Catherine stammered, gathering her things. "No harm done," Mara replied evenly. They might have parted there, but Hope chose that moment to race around the corner. "Mama, Samuel's being mean." She stopped, staring at the stranger's baby with a child's directness. "Pretty baby." Catherine's face crumbled. "Thank you, sweet girl. You're very pretty too." Something in her voice, a weight of sorrow, made Mara pause. She saw not the woman who'd destroyed Rowan's life, but a mother holding a baby, wearing a dress mended too many times, with bruises barely hidden by powder on her wrist. "Hope, go find your brother," Mara said gently. When the child ran off, she faced Catherine. "You're the Weatherby place, aren't you?" Catherine nodded, tears starting. Please don't. My husband doesn't know about before. If he found out..." "Found out what?" Mara kept her voice neutral. That before him, I was involved in something terrible. Someone got hurt because of me. I was young and stupid and believed lies and— She broke off, sobbing quietly to not attract attention. Mara should have felt satisfaction. Here was Rowan's betrayer, broken and afraid, but all she felt was pity. Another woman trapped, another mother desperate. "Your father is in town," she said quietly. Catherine went white. "No, he can't. If he finds me, if my husband learns—" Her grip on the baby tightened. "I'll run. I'll take my children and—" "Running is hard with children," Mara said, voice heavy with experience. "Trust me." They stood there, two women with too much history between them. Finally, Mara made a choice. "The church has a back room. Meet me there in an hour." Catherine's eyes widened with desperate hope. "Why would you—" "Because someone needs to break the chain. Go!" An hour later, in the dusty church storage room, three people faced each other. Mara had brought Rowan. Despite his resistance, Catherine sat on a crate, baby in her arms, looking like she might bolt at any moment. "Hello, Catherine," Rowan said quietly. She flinched. "Rowan, Oh God, I thought you were dead. They said you died in that cave." "Almost did. 10 years is a long time to be chained like an animal." I know what I did. There's no forgiveness for it." She was crying openly now. "Clay, he promised. Money, security, a future. I was so young, and you were just some drifter. And I believed him when he said you'd done it. You knew I hadn't. Later, I knew later. By then it was too late. Clay owned me as much as—" She glanced at Mara, understanding passing between them. "When I finally ran, I thought maybe I could forget, started over, new name, found a decent man. But the past—" "Your father," Mara said. "He'll drag me back. My husband will learn I'm a liar. My children—" She hugged her baby tighter. "They don't deserve to pay for my sins." Rowan stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Mara watched him struggle, saw the moment he made his choice. He turned back. "Thomas Frost," he said formally. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Weatherby. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Catherine stared. Then understanding dawned. Yes, Catherine Weatherby. I've lived here 3 years. And before that, there is no before that." Her voice grew stronger. "I was born the day I married my husband." Rowan nodded once. "Then we have no problem. Though you might want to write your father. Tell him Catherine is dead, fever, maybe, very sad. But the woman he's looking for doesn't exist," Mara said firmly. "Hasn't for years. Let her rest." Catherine wept then, great healing sobs. When she finally quieted, she looked at them with something like awe. "I destroyed your life, and you're saving mine." "No," Rowan corrected. "We're saving your children. They deserve what all children do, a chance." They left separately, carefully. But first, Catherine gripped Mara's hands. "That woman, Clay's slave, they said she died in the mountains." "She did," Mara confirmed. "I'm Mary Frost, mother, farmer's wife, nothing more." A week later, old man Jameson left town, carrying his daughter's letter about her tragic death from fever, complete with a lock of hair Catherine had cut. He mourned publicly, accepted condolences, headed back south to bury his grief. The Weatherbys and Frosts began a careful friendship. Picnics where children played together, shared harvests, women talking over tea while men mended fences, never speaking of the past, building something better in the present. Years flowed by like the creek behind their cabin. Hope grew into a young woman, fierce and free, who could ride and shoot and read Latin because Mara insisted on education. Samuel became a steady boy who loved the land. Elizabeth showed Rowan's gift with animals. 2 more children followed, James and Sarah, named for the family Rowan couldn't save but would never forget. The world changed around them. Railways reached their corner of Manitoba. The town grew from a handful of buildings to proper streets. News came of America's wounds, reconstruction, conflict, slow, painful progress towards something better. One winter evening, Hope, now 17 and beautiful, sat with her parents by the fire. "Tell me," she said suddenly. "Tell me why you cry sometimes. Mama, when you think no one sees. Tell me why Papa's shoulder aches before storms. Tell me why we're different from everyone else." Mara and Rowan exchanged looks. Time. Then, for truth, they told her everything. The cave, the chains, the escape, the running, Clay's death and their rebirth. They showed her the newspaper clippings Mara had saved, the Liberty papers that were lies, the Shoshone blessing pouch she'd carried as a baby. Hope listened in silence, tears streaming. When they finished, she moved between them, holding them both. "You're the bravest people in the world," she whispered. "No," Rowan said. "Just people who chose each other over everything else." "That's what brave is," Hope insisted. Later, as the children slept and snow fell soft outside, Mara and Rowan sat together as they had so many nights before. His hair was gray now, her face lined, but their hands still fit perfectly together. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if you'd never been chained, if I'd never been enslaved?" "We'd never have met," he said simply. "Never had this." She nodded, understanding. The cruelty that brought them together couldn't be separated from the love they'd found, like gold refined in fire. Something precious had emerged from suffering. "I used to dream of being free," she murmured. "Now I know freedom isn't just being unchained. It's choosing your chains, the ones that bind you to people worth being bound to. Philosophy now," he teased gently. "Wisdom," she corrected. "Hard won." A wolf howled in the distance, that wild sound they'd once fled to. Now it was just part of the landscape of home. They'd run far enough, fought hard enough, survived long enough to stop looking over their shoulders. In the morning, there would be chores and children and all the small struggles of ordinary life. Catherine would come for tea, still grateful after all these years. The community would gather for harvest, no one questioning the Frost family's place among them. But tonight, in the warmth of their cabin, surrounded by sleeping children born free, Mara and Rowan held each other and remembered. A cave in Wyoming, chains in darkness, two people who'd found light in each other and refused to let go. "Thank you," Rowan whispered, as he did sometimes, "for finding me." "Thank you," she whispered back, "for being worth finding." The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows. Outside, snow erased all tracks, all paths, leaving the world clean and new. Inside, two souls who'd bought their freedom with everything they had held tight and knew it was enough. They'd written their own ending, and it was good. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this incredible journey through She Was Just a Rancher's Slave, until she saved the feared mountain man chained for 10 years long. I hope Mara and Rowan's story of love, survival, and freedom touched your heart as deeply as it touched mine. Please share in the comments where you're listening from. I love connecting with our worldwide audience. If you enjoyed this tale from the Wild West, please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts below. Your comments mean the world to me, and I read every single one. Until next time, keep the spirit of the frontier alive in your hearts.